cannot fit in the boxes. Stop it, stop it. Quitting was never an option. Exhausted, exhausted. This passion is never exhausted. And you cannot stop it. Nah, you cannot stop it.
I had to switch up the flow, show you the way that it go. God is good, but his life is hard. But it gets better when you grind it smart. I'm just really trying to leave a mark. We tired of being who they say we are. That's the baton, we gon' take it far. Always been real, we don't fake it all. Tired of 9 to 5, just make enough to survive. Only living on the weekends. You really thinking that's why I'm alive? Busting out the scenes, time to live my dreams, do the things deep inside of me. This life it continues with fighting me, but I don't have quitting inside of me. I will not jump in these boxes they throwing me. Talking to God and there's so much he's showing me, shaping me, growing me, taking me sowing seeds. A growing tree, y'all get a load of me. Yeah, don't let them slow me. I get the bag like a grocery. I'm on my grind like I'm supposed to be, and I do not care if you notice me.
Boxes, boxes. I cannot fit in the boxes. Stop it, stop it. Quitting was never an option. Exhausted, exhausted. This passion is never exhausted. And you cannot stop it. Nah, you cannot stop it.
This isn't a robbery. Hands in the sky if you got a dream. Learn nothing was blocking me. I was the problem, the only one stopping me. I didn't like it, I had to refocus. Now I'm devoted, I know where I'm going. Controlling emotions, I'm owning the moment. In order to get it, see, you gotta want it. This type of flow make a living break. Confessions over these 808s. Don't sleep on the key, better stay away. I mean, for heaven's sake, I'ma be the best. Came from the endless, I ain't with the games, bitch with the chest. Be beating on my chest, trying to get my rest. Watch me while I flex. Every win is a blessing, and every L is a lesson. So when I run into rejection, I know it's only redirection. I see the blessings right beside me. The chances of quitting unlikely. I do it like I'm in my Nikes. Don't make excuses, they never excite me.
Boxes, boxes. I cannot fit in the boxes. Stop it, stop it. Quitting was never an option. Exhausted, exhausted. This passion is never exhausted. And you cannot stop it. Nah, you cannot stop it. Quitting was never an option. And you cannot stop it. Nah, you cannot stop it.
Hi. So, I hope I didn't make you too dizzy there with all the drone spinning. Don't worry, I won't do that again. I'm still trying to figure out how to use it exactly. And it survived the crash. That was actually right at the start of the video when I was filming it. It was fun. Hey, so if you're new here, my name's Pat Stuart. In these videos, I want to talk about the really technical, nuanced side of dog training, not the basics. So if you're looking for advice on how to train a puppy or, fix minor problems with dogs, there's a video for that here or somewhere. But today, we're going to talk about more specific, detailed, nuanced stuff. And right now, I want to talk about reward delivery and placement. And I'm going to use the send away to a marker board, directionals, as the vehicle to discuss that. So what I really want to talk about is direct reward versus indirect rewards. I think one of the problems that we have in the dog training community or dog training world is that we don't always agree on a standardized set of definitions. And I think sometimes the arguments that people have are, in essence about a technique, but in reality, people usually agree on technique largely. Their problem comes from a definition problem, and they're not agreeing on the way a word is used, and that doesn't allow them to communicate effectively about the technique. So I want to define a direct reward versus an indirect reward. Now, a direct reward, from my point of view, is a reward that the pursuit of the reinforcer or the reward brings on the behavior. So if you're luring something, that is a direct reward. In my mind, an indirect reward is a reward whereby the dog has to perform a behavior in order to earn a reward or reinforcer that may or may not be visible to him and may or may not be known to him. The thing is, you can start with a direct reward, but if you want to call your dog trained, for the most part, they then have to be able to work for the indirect reward. And it doesn't necessarily matter whether we're talking about whether it's a food reward or a tug, game, ball, whatever. That's not important within those definitions from my point of view. If the dog's pursuing it and that brings on the behavior, then that's a direct reward. If your dog has to perform a behavior in order to earn it, break away from that behavior and then get it, that's an indirect reward. There's a couple of like really nuanced behaviors that we could discuss where, you might start with one and end in another in a less obvious fashion. So if we're luring a dog into the heel, for the most part, it's a direct reward to start. And then, if we're going to go into competition or just call our dog trained, we need to be able to no longer lure it, have the reinforcer or the reward in our pocket or in the car or even not at all, and have the dog perform the behavior. And that would be the indirect reward. There's a couple of behaviors where we would start with the direct reward for a specific reason other than that it's easier to teach, right? And that would perhaps be detection. Having the dog hunt for the ball for a long time prior to pairing it to any odor. So he's actually just hunting for the thing that he wants is really good and often used to develop the hunt pattern before we add any odor. Of course, if it's going to be a bomb dog, that odor becomes the source and the reinforcer or reward has to be done indirectly off the source because it's dangerous to reinforce on the source of the bomb, right? So there's weird technical little things. The behavior you just saw me training is directionals. So directionals is one of the funny ones that most people teach with a direct reward, because where I will use that in my game that I play with my dogs would usually be to tell him to go to one decoy over another when there's two available and he's not just allowed to choose. I have to tell him which one to go to. So when I use that behavior, that will in that moment be a direct reward because he's going to bite or to guard or to do whatever the behavior I ask of him in front of the decoy, the bad guy, the guy is going to bite. So by pursuing the reinforcer, going to the bad guy, he'll bite, he performs a behavior. That's how I'll probably use that behavior most with my dog. But I don't train it that way. I train it going to marker boards. So my dog learns to follow my hand signals, determine like a left from a right per se, but certainly know when I'm pointing him at one thing, one object of his desire, in the presence of two, that's the one I'm telling him to go to. It becomes really important to me to be able to change my mind about that, which you saw there, where I tell him to go to one, I change my mind, tell him to go to the other. I much prefer to train that using the indirect reward, even though my final version of that behavior will be for a direct reward. And the reason I like to train it with the indirect reward means that I can be much more hands-off, more off-leash with the dog, because if he makes mistakes, if he goes to the wrong marker board, he can't be self-reinforcing. If they were balls, if they were decoys, if they were tugs that were out there and I told him to go to one and he didn't go to that one, he went to the other, he would be reinforcing for not doing the behavior that I asked. Of course, there's ways around that. It's not like you just let that happen. That means that we use leashes and we have to, maybe if we're using a back tie on a fixed limit, we can put the one that we're not pointing to outside the reach of the dog so that even if he tries to go to it, he can't get it. There's lots of different little things that we can do like that. And realistically, we probably should do them all at some point to maximize our dog's understanding of the behaviors, given the most robust version of the behavior, the one that he's most likely to be able to do all the time. But for me, in many behaviors, I prefer to use that indirect reward. I think for the most part, you have to get to the indirect reward. So I prefer to start there wherever possible or get there as soon as possible. But when I'm quoted on that's why I'm making this video. I want to show that that's not always the case. Sometimes the behavior will result in a direct reward and you can still train that with an indirect reward, and sometimes the behavior will result in an indirect reward and the best way to train it is with a direct reward. That's it. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, I have a whole online course. If you've made it this far into the video, you must at least be interested in the way I train my dog and some of the things I have to say. You can jump into the description below. There's going to be a little thing that says my online courses, find my online course. There's a link there, you can click that. That'll take you to my website. There's two courses, paid ones. There's a free one on how to raise a puppy. That's there. Anyone can jump into that at any time. But there's two paid ones. There's one that is Nipopo, the long story short, which is like 40 minutes long explanation of what Nipopo is. And you need to already know quite a lot about dog training. That's just going to explain to you what the Nipopo part is. The other is the bootcamp study guide. And prior to the pandemic, which we're deep in again right now in Australia, I'd organised a series of boot camps, and that study guide was the prerequisite to come and train with me in person. I made that available last year to people to buy because we can't do any of the in-person. So if you want to check that out, if you like learning this way, have a look at it. It's pretty good. It gets good feedback. Anyway, that's it from me. See ya.